Rob, thanks so much for joining us today. Rob is the co-founder of Fletch, which is a product marketing agency for early stage SaaS startups and one of my favorite companies to follow on LinkedIn. So much great content there. I just interviewed your co-founder, Anthony, a couple weeks ago, and that was an amazing discussion. And I know this one is going to be great too. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and appreciate the intro. You're too kind.
So why don't we start by getting some background about you for those of us who aren't familiar about your career and what led you to product marketing and your work at Fletch.
Yeah, absolutely. My career, like most folks in product in general, has gone through a couple pivots in different areas. I would say the theme of my career has been new product and technology commercialization, and I've seen it from all different sides. And so I actually started my career in biomedical engineering and product development, developing surgical instruments for spinal procedures, like really specialty spinal surgeries. And then from there pivoted into product consulting, new product development for established companies, primarily in SaaS that were trying to build new products. And then from there pivoted into technical sales and sales engineering. Did about 5 years, like tour of duty in sales, eventually leading a small sales team before moving more into product marketing, looking at, again, adding on new products and launching new products at established companies. So that's been my personal like tours of duty, all from like, how do you go about building a new product? How do you then structure the business models and the commercialization plans to go and execute? And I really think I found a home in product marketing, kind of bringing all those components together.
Very cool. So starting with some fundamentals about product marketing, I know a lot of people might be confused about the term product marketing. A lot of people might think that product marketing is any type of marketing you do for a product, for example. But we know that there's a huge difference between the different types of marketing within the product space. Like brand marketing, for example, is not product marketing. Can you give us your definition of product marketing and how people should be looking at it?
Yeah. The timing's too funny because I literally just posted about this morning, and there's been a nice healthy debate on LinkedIn where effectively I threw up my definition of brand marketing and my definition of product marketing. And it seems obvious to a lot of folks. I don't know why a lot of people get confused about this, but product marketing actually talks about the product and the problem the product solves. And I think for most early stage startups, that's going to should make up 99% of your marketing when you're early. Brand marketing is speaking more to your company, where you're trying to get people to remember your company name, but not necessarily talking about the product. It leans more into our values and our POV and that sort of thing, but it doesn't actually talk about the product. And you can blend these together, but like most of the startups we work with, we recommend doing more product marketing because that's where you're going to be executing and actually educating the market about the problem and your product. I like the heuristic that Jason Lemkin actually shared recently, where he looks at brand marketing as something you shouldn't do in the early stages. When you hit 10 million, okay, we'll do a little bit of it. When you hit 100 million in revenue, it's like, okay, most of your marketing should be brand marketing. And then when you hit 1 billion in revenue, it's almost all brand marketing, where you're in these really established categories. And it's all about name recognition at that point, because everybody knows what these tools do and the problems they solve. And so my view of product marketing really comes back to like, it is talking about the product. It is talking about the problem the product solves. And it makes up the majority of marketing. And I think then there's this extra layer of like, what does a product marketer do? And then we get into the nitty gritty around positioning and messaging and go-to-market strategy. But I'll pause there because that's kind of how I see the separation of those two things.
Makes good sense for sure. So definitely at the early stages, it seems like product marketing is something that you have to do, whereas brand marketing, debatable whether that's a necessity and really depends on your budget and your goals. So are there any other big common misconceptions that people have about product marketing, in your opinion, that you like to get out of the way early on?
Yeah, most folks look at product marketing. It kind of ties into that definition. I think product marketing and positioning often get conflated. And so like the misconception, I think, for early stage startups is that if you're doing product marketing, you're not actually doing the marketing activities. And my point of view on this is that is wrong. If you're at an early stage company and you're a product marketer, at the end of the day, you're just a marketer. You have to execute the work as well and separate out the strategy work, which gets into positioning, messaging, and go-to-market strategy from the execution, but because you're early, most of the work is in the execution. In fact, you shouldn't be spending too much time on the strategy, or you're just spinning your wheels, delaying key decisions that you have to make. Now, that can change when you get into later stage companies where product marketing really does come back to primarily just being more strategic focused. The irony is that at these late stage companies, it's also the product marketers that end up doing a very specific task, such as creating sales decks and one-pagers. But that's a tension that I see in the industry around like doing product marketing in the early stage. Last bit I'll say around not so much misconceptions, but like product marketing in the early stages and product strategy in the early stages are completely interlinked, and you really can't do one without the other. And this is why I think a lot of like forward-thinking companies like take Airbnb are trying to change the narrative even around the title of product marketing. All of their product managers, they are saying, no, those are product marketers that own both of those strategies on the product side and on the actual positioning and go-to-market side.
Definitely. Yeah. It seems like there would be a big difference between some of those larger organizations and also early stage startups when it comes to how they're defining product marketing. Things might get a little confusing when it gets to that level. A lot of companies now seem to be more focused on profitability, I think for two reasons. Number one, because there's more early stage SaaS companies, a lot more bootstrap companies, for example, that need to be focused on profit. And also for a lot of reasons related to the market. It seems like VCs are more focused on profitability now and those real bottom line metrics. For better or worse, I think that's actually a healthy thing. It's probably a good thing that companies are more focused on profitability. But I think it has a big implication for product marketers and for what you guys are doing, because I think it ties very closely to profit. Where do you think that the market is headed in this way? And how do you think early stage startups should be going about doing product marketing?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question for so many reasons. I'll start by saying there's always been this healthy tension between good product marketing and like what VCs want to see and like going after all these different markets. And so like when I look at should startups take VC money? Like, where's the market going? I don't know if it's so much about where the market is going as much as like, how do you as a founder want to build your company? My personal opinion about venture capital is I think it's a wonderful tool after you establish some baseline product market fit, which to a lot of folks is heresy. They're like, no, we need VC money to even get started. I just disagree. I think by forcing founders to think like very practical product marketers in the early stages and effectively be a bootstrap company to find fit, then you can rely on VCs for the hyper growth. Like that's what they're there for. And so like the thing that keeps happening to a lot of these pre-seed and seed companies is the clock starts ticking when they take that money. They take the money thinking they're going to go fast. The issue is they don't know what direction they want to go in. And so it almost doesn't matter how fast they go, because if you don't know what direction you want to head in, it's like, great, you're just going to spin yourself in circles. And so for me, when I think about early stage startups, like what does successful product marketing and product strategy look like in the early stages is find fit and don't die. And to me, there's no better like foundations and fundamentals than to think like a bootstrap company in doing that. It forces you to be that way. When you take the VC money, you almost let yourself off the hook of like, well, I don't I've got a little extra money to spend. Like I don't have to get the fundamentals right. Those are the companies that effectively hit a growth wall because they didn't solve for those foundations. I love that the VC market has sort of adopted this efficiencies. That's more of like a meta view of like funds and availability and interest rates and all that stuff. Like I look at it as like, I don't really care about that as much in terms of just getting the fundamentals right. Paul Graham talks about this, like startups are growth. To me, if I was a founder and I was building a SaaS product, and in fact, we may do this in the future, I'm going to treat my SaaS product like a bootstrap company. And then once I find fit, maybe go the venture route as a way to go hyperspeed, true rocket ship stuff. But too many folks think they have to do it early on, and they don't realize that they end up running their companies and making these decisions based on someone else's goals and implications of like, oh shoot, I was just handed all this money and now I have to go build a certain way even before I'm ready.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you. And after working with a lot of venture-backed companies and now working with a lot more bootstrap companies, it's a different world. And based on what you're saying and also my own experience, I would say no matter who you are, if you're a venture-backed or whatever, try to work with people who have been bootstrapped before, just because it's such an important perspective and it's something that we can bring to the venture-backed market as well. And yeah, I just have so much respect for the bootstrap founders out there that are doing it in the focus that they have. I know that Fletch is all about the frameworks and the visuals. Like I said, you guys are like my favorite LinkedIn influencers to follow because of the infographics and because of the frameworks that you have. Those graphics just make it so easy to understand what next steps you should take and how you should go about the SOP of doing product marketing. Could you walk us through like some of these frameworks and some of your perspective on developing that hard-hitting positioning for a SaaS startup that you guys use?
This effectively, as I get into our frameworks, this is how we view positioning in a nutshell. We have to answer 4 key questions. What the heck is the thing? Who is it for? What does it replace or augment? And why is it better than that alternative? And so for us, we use the homepage as like our litmus test of how clear are we being answering those questions. Because it's really funny. Once you have to make it real and put it on a page, it really highlights where there's alignment, where there's disalignment. And so in our view, the way we've built up our model is there's foundationally 2 approaches to ultimately segment your market to begin making some of these key positioning decisions. One is a category-based approach, and the other is a use case-based approach. Some examples is probably the best way to start sharing this. Category-based approaches are effectively using known categories as a heuristic, as a reference point for what I would do with the product. We're saying the use case just doesn't make sense. And so Figma, what I'm showing here, is anchoring on a known category when they launched these interface design tools that were a thing and people were using. This is effectively what they were replacing as a way of introducing their unique differentiation. It wouldn't have made sense for Figma to go like try and explain all the use cases because everyone already had this tool. All the use cases were known and understood. They found a better way of carrying out those use cases. And so this framing just makes sense to explain the differentiation. Linear did something very, very similar in the issue tracking tool space. These tools were well known by developers, and you can kind of see their POV and their differentiation here. They basically were like, hey, these other tools were built for developers. They're clunky. They're super hard to use. We made one with a modern UX effectively from a positioning standpoint. It just works for them. Now, when we go the use case route, effectively what use case positioning means is it means you're positioning for a more immature market. And so Calendly, when they launched, they couldn't call themselves a calendar tool because that doesn't really tell you what it is. They could have maybe called themselves a scheduling tool, but at the time that wasn't like a known thing. There weren't a lot of tools out there that weren't super like industry specific and verticalized. And so from a positioning standpoint, they had to anchor on this use case and then bring up, well, what does that compete with? What's the alternative for scheduling meetings? And it ultimately was sending back and forth emails. And so this is how they get to really razor sharp messaging that highlights that key positioning. Same idea with Tango. There was no software training walkthrough platforms out there. So they just have to tell you what it is and then say why it's better than the alternative. And so when I bring up the frameworks, like those are examples. If I flash forward into like the frameworks that we have, this is effectively our positioning and messaging canvas that we use with our customers when they work with us. What I just described are really the top 2 rows of the canvas, really represent the highest level positioning. And you could see how the different elements all live here. So this whole top row is really answering the question of like, who is it for? What types of companies is it for? What business models, firmographic type stuff? Who's the champion and target departments that's the audience for this message? And then we have our product category and primary use case. These are the main elements to answer that question of like, what is the thing? Relative to what it's competing with, right? This gets us into that second row of like, what is this replacing? Because you do have to say what it replaced to the audience you're going after. That alternative certainly has limitations and problems, and those problems should be almost counter to your differentiation, where you're saying, hey, you're doing it this old way, it's broken, do it with us, it's a better way. And so when we nail these top line elements, and we really do surface a bunch of different options when we're doing this, then we can get into the messaging. Well, how do we support this? What are the main arguments we would say? How do we talk about our product to even make this positioning make sense and pop? And then we have what we call supporting messaging. This is actually more tied into like the actual messaging for a homepage of what other sections do we need. And so this is foundationally our framework where we spend a lot of time with customers is we really audit all the things they could use. So we take all those elements in those top rows and we say, hey, based on how you're talking today, these are all the companies you're helping. These are the different departments you could enter into. These are all the use cases that you address. And these are all the categories where your product might be related to. And we start to map different options of these and then step back and say, hey, like, ultimately, what argument is the best? Which one actually represents the area where we're 10x better than another group? And really what we're evaluating is this compelling at all? Will it make sense? Can we get clear? Will it actually get someone to maybe change behavior when they see this and understand what it is? And so I'll pause there. That's kind of our nutshell and our core framework for how we unpack and then build back these things up with clients.
Amazing. I love how you've wrapped up that SOP. And it's just so important to get this positioning right for an early stage SaaS company. So I love how you frame that here and how you've focused on homepage. Is there anything else that you think is super important for an early stage SaaS company when it comes to go-to-market strategy? Or do you have any kind of overall philosophy about go-to-market and product launches for early stage SaaS?
Yeah, there's a couple things in there. Philosophy-wise, your market and what you decide to build, and this goes into like the use case and the company type and department that you're serving, they're going to dictate your strategy more than your vision. You might have an idea of like what you'd like to do in marketing, but it doesn't matter what you want to do. It matters how your market wants to find, evaluate, buy, and use products. And so where this has big implications when we work with a lot of early stage startups is they don't have a lot of skills on the marketing side, which is okay. And so like we see this example come up a lot where they're like, hey, we have a VC, they told us we need to go enterprise, and so we want a position for the enterprise. And we're like, okay, that's great. And again, this goes out of the scope of our actual service. But once we nail the positioning to the enterprise, the next step is going like, okay, what channels and tactics are we going to use to reach this audience in the enterprise? And the funniest thing happens sometimes is like, they don't have a good way to reach them. They don't have existing relationships. The enterprise sales motion and how that works is like events, a bunch of outbound, and they've never done it before. And so sometimes we use that as a smoke test of the positioning. It's like, hey, when you go do this, do you actually have the resources to go execute a go-to-market strategy that aligns to the positioning strategy? And oftentimes they don't. And so what Anthony and I like to say is like, you should position relative to what's achievable with your skill set and your resources. Meaning like, if you're pretty good at, I don't know, organic LinkedIn, you should probably position for groups who are on LinkedIn, and that can help make some of those key decisions of who it's for. And so when it comes to go-to-market strategy, it really just comes back to like, do things you can actually do to an audience you have connections with already, or else it's going to be super freaking hard. The second, I would say, core principle we have about go-to-market strategy, especially for early stage folks, is really being aggressive about focusing on one channel and one tactic. Now, it's not to say you won't do some experimentation in different areas, but once you know like something's sort of starting to work, or that you're like, hey, this is the thing we want to bet on, because all marketing really is a bet. It's a long-term investment. You have to double down. And we live and breathe this ourselves. We effectively have been using one channel and one tactic for the past 20 months. And it's been fantastic because like we put all of our effort into it. It's taken both Anthony and I, dedicated for almost 2 years, pounding the pavement on organic content LinkedIn, and it drives all of our revenue. Like we're talking like millions in pipeline just by doing that one thing. What we see a lot of companies do is they're like, I'm going to have a LinkedIn channel. I'm going to do a podcast. I'm going to do Twitter. I'm going to start a newsletter. We're going to run ads. And the reality is you're basically going to partially execute those. And they're not going to have the returns that they would if you doubled down in the first place. And so those two things, like do what you can actually do to an audience you can actually reach, and then pick a thing and be consistent. And then once you have that thing working, then you can branch off. And so like for the listeners, Justin and I were even talking before, we now, 2 years into running LinkedIn effectively, where we have that playbook working, we may now branch off and add a channel. We may go do a podcast. We may move into Twitter and these other channels to reach folks. Those are kind of the two big things that I would recommend for early stage.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great stuff. So to recap, it sounds like in your philosophy, the two most important things are, number one, if you're an early stage startup and you're doing positioning, you really need to know how you're going to reach the people who you're positioning for, because otherwise you could have this amazing positioning, but that's like, hiding a diamond somewhere in a cave because no one can see it. The right people aren't seeing that positioning.
It's the field of dreams. It's like we built this beautiful product for enterprise, but we never figured out a way to actually explain it and get it in front of those folks. It's like, if a tree falls in the woods, does it make a sound? And I don't know the answer to that, but same idea is like, well, do they know that there's this badass product? If they don't, it's as if it never happened.
Exactly. Right. So you need to know how you're going to reach the people you're positioning for. And then the second thing you mentioned is that you need to have a really efficient plan. Don't bite off more than you can chew with regards to your marketing plan. If you're just starting, start with one marketing channel that you think you can really nail, or use your data and just ruthlessly cut the channels that aren't efficient or that aren't getting you the return that you want, basically. It reminds me of the conversation that Anthony and I had last week about making a product offer for an early stage company. And I think a lot of early stage SaaS companies, especially, the venture funded ones, have this pressure to do more, to reach more, to have bigger goals. So they want to have tons of use cases. They want to have tons of different markets, different audiences right out of the gate. And it sounds like that's oftentimes the same thing with marketing. They want to bite off more than they can chew. They're having this big integrated marketing plan when really it's better to just focus on one thing. It's better to focus on one marketing channel, nail that, and build from there. Just like it's better to focus on one key market, one type of consumer, one use case, and build from there.
And the way we frame it to these folks, and you nailed it in your summary, it's like, this stuff is freaking hard to get it to work. And so whenever we bump up against this with the customers we work with, these founders, we phrase it this way as like, hey, you don't have a single marketing channel that's actually working and actually predictable. What on earth makes you think you can do 10 at the same time with a team of 1.5 marketers? And when we phrase it that way, we often get these like ghost looks of like, oh shit. And we want them to have that oh shit thought so that they can then be like, okay, I get it. I have limited resources. I need to focus.
Definitely. So you guys at Fletch, you focus on positioning as it relates to the home page. Are there any goals that you have when you develop positioning and a go-to-market strategy for an early stage SaaS company? Are there any goals that you specifically have with your service? And are there any goals that you think the marketer should look at for their particular campaign that's, most helpful for them?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I love it for a bunch of reasons. We get asked all the time, how do I measure my positioning? What's the outcome I'm going to get when I work with you? Which is a version of what you're asking. And different to, like, there's agencies out there that promise customers and growth and all this stuff. And candidly, we think that's bullshit. Like, there's too many variables to this stuff to actually be able to promise that. And so for us, what we say, like, when you work with us on positioning, the only things we promise are clarity of thinking in your positioning, truly like confidence level stuff on the founder side of like, that's what I'm trying to do. That's who it's for. That's how I'm going to approach the market and who we're going to compete with. Having conviction in that is super powerful because it enables making all the right decisions when you move into actually building the marketing strategies. The second thing we promise is a clearer message on the homepage. And some folks look at that and they're like, wait, no conversions, like signups, all this. And again, we're using homepage as a litmus test for reflecting the positioning because we think it should live there, but doing conversion rate optimization is not positioning. They are different things entirely. And the hard truth that these entrepreneurs have to learn is like positioning almost is entrepreneurship in a nutshell. Of it is a low data, high risk set of decisions that you have to make. You can't see around those corners. You don't know what's going to work. And even worse, you won't know if it works until 18 months, 36 months later. Mm-hmm. And so if you were to truly measure positioning, you would have to measure like cohorts of somebody way before funnel, entering the top of your marketing funnel, moving through that, seeing the homepage, buying, activating, using the product, and then did they stick around? And then looking at them and saying, did that positioning work for what we told them we solved? How we explained what we did, how they onboarded and how we delivered, and was it consistent? And it's made up of hundreds of variables. And so like you can't measure it. And this even bleeds into, you talked about like, what should I be tracking like in these types of campaigns as a marketer? It's really tricky because like all this stuff is hard to measure. You have to think about it as measuring the leading indicators of what's working. And so, for example, for our own business, the way we approach this, we don't have a set of marketing targets that we have to hit. we look at the tactics we're using, basically LinkedIn content marketing for the positioning that we have. But like, we didn't A/B test our positioning. We made a intuitive decision to say, hey, I think this is going to work if we position it this way. And we've been running at it for 2 years. And we might be able to say, oh yeah, look, it worked. And we were tweaking it along the ways, but it's all qualitative. And so the only things we don't even track, the things we look at is to make our positioning and our go-to-market work is, are we getting engagement on the content? And are we delivering value on the content? Because our thesis in our go-to-market strategy was, if we help as many founders and marketers up funnel and give as much away for free as possible, we'll earn trust and credibility that when people eventually have the problem we solve, they'll come and work with us. And that's turned out to be true, but we don't have any like, hey, do this X times to push this style of pipeline and all that. Like, you don't need all that. And in fact, if we did that, we'd probably start making a lot of bad decisions. So I'll pause there. Like that's how we think about our own measurement and truthfully, the lack of measurement as it relates to positioning in general.
Definitely. That makes sense. And it kind of reminds me, I think it was a post that either you or Anthony did at some point talking about the difference between sales and marketing, or the difference between how you should look at what you put on the homepage versus the conversation you have when you're in a sales discussion. And sales, can be more focused on how this product is going to generate revenue for the business, how it's going to grow the business. Whereas, the homepage positioning is what you're trying to do is much different. And even taking it a level higher than that, if you're trying to convince people of a problem, if you're trying to convince people that your product category is right to solve their problem, that's something you do on LinkedIn. That's something you do in your podcast or blog. It's not necessarily something you do on the homepage, which is different than what you do in a sales discussion. So bringing it home to what you were talking about, I think that it's probably going to give you a lot of insight to talk to your sales team and get a read from them on how well they understand what the product is and how it's positioned, how much work the sales team is having to do from that point. Would you say that's fair to say?
I definitely think that's accurate. And like your messaging will change, right? This is what gets a lot of teams in trouble is bringing salespeople into positioning can be helpful, but you just have to be super careful because the messages and arguments that close a deal are different than the messages that got people in the room in the first place. Every salesperson on the planet is going to talk to you about business outcomes and ROI. Because when you get to the stage 5 of a sales cycle, and like I've been an account executive, I get this. At that point, you already have the trust of your champion. You've also probably earned some support of the adjacent departments that you're going to serve. The last bit of support you need is from this executive who's not going to use your product. They probably don't even care what it does. And the CFO is also probably involved. You need to make this business case. And I built those and they are required. If you're a salesperson, like tell me the ROI. And like sometimes they're really squishy, but like then the salespeople get in the room of positioning and they're like, no. It was that business ROI that closed the deal. Like that's how we should position it. And it's like, if you put that in your marketing, like no one's going to take a meeting. And that's why we think B2B SaaS is littered with terrible marketing messaging because they're regurgitating the message that the salesperson did in meeting 17 to close the deal when you're trying to message to earn meeting number 1. And that's where you see the grow revenue increase, 300x ROI and all this hoopla stuff that doesn't answer the questions that these prospects need to hear, which is problem oriented and clarity around what the heck the thing even does. And so, yeah, the long-winded way of saying yes with a little bit more context behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you mentioned that. I saw some kind of a study recently that was talking about the negative implications of talking about ROI too early on in the process, or talking about 10xing your revenue, your ROI, in cold outreach and on LinkedIn and your top of funnel marketing. It just kind of turns people off. It sets off that BS meter, and I tend to agree with that. I am curious to hear about like an example that you would give of a really successful campaign that you think hit all those green marks for everything that you think should go into a successful positioning campaign, a successful go-to-market strategy for an early stage company.
Well, so I've got 2 case studies I'll share. And I'm going to challenge a little bit even on the campaign, because truthfully, I don't think there's such a thing as a positioning campaign. I look at it more of like solving the positioning and then building out various campaign strategies to support the positioning. And so I'm going to take more of a positioning angle of like, what does good look like in some examples. The first one, and I don't have a visual for this one, but it ties back into the idea of measurement, is we had this company we worked with basically have a tool that's in the HR space for measuring and tracking skills and tools and that sort of thing, and like identifying skill gaps. If memory serves, they're called AG5. And they're already having some success. And so they came to us and they said, hey, we're getting 80 leads a month coming through our homepage. We're like, oh, that's great. And they literally asked, is this going to go to 100 when we work with you? And we told, again, you heard my answer. We told them point blank, like, not necessarily, no. And in fact, our view is there's a decent chance it'll go down, because good positioning actually is a pre-filter. It's almost a pre-qualifier to get rid of all the people that, okay, you got them to click the button and join the meeting, but it turns out they're not even looking for the thing that they thought you were, right? We're trying to solve that. And so this is an interesting one, because flash forward, truthfully, I think we're about 18 months out working with them. They came back to us and they gave us that same case study. They said, hey, our leads actually went down from 80 to 60 a month, but our pipeline and closed revenue went up. And so that to us is a pure example of like good positioning, walking out further down the marketing and sales funnel, actually getting into the product. And there's all these kind of great things that happen. Is like the sales team was no longer burning time with these bad fit prospects because they had this really sharpened and dialed in message. And so that's a really wonderful example to me of how sharpening the positioning can actually influence and support what you're doing, even on the conversion side of the house. There's another company that I'll share here, and I do have a visual for this one because I got their permission, and they actually just shared this on LinkedIn recently the other day. And so this company is Toro TMS. For context, they're in the trucking management industry. And when they came to us, they were positioning as this all-in-one software, this trucking management software for carriers to strengthen your operations. And they said, hey, look, trucking management software, it's been around for a while. It's really crowded. And they just point blank were like, we want to invest in marketing, but like we're having a hard time standing out, because a lot of TMS shows up this way because it's kind of baked in. The idea of a trucking management software piece is that, oh yeah, we start to automate all the things you do to run your software business because it's pretty vertical overall. And so in our model, this is effectively what it looked like in our canvas. We're targeting carriers, all-in-one software and trucking management software. The use case is operations, which can mean a bunch of different things. And they're basically saying, hey, we're easy to use, we'll help you save time and improve profits. When we worked with them, there was two key questions we had to like suss out. Is like, hey, this is generic. What does your product do that other products don't do? In other words, where's the product really 10x better? Do you have any differentiation? What's interesting for this group is they felt like they did. And they immediately brought up their dispatching tool. And they said, if we can get these companies to see our dispatching tool, we almost always win the deal. And so that was a great place for us to start. We then worked backwards and said, well, who cares about dispatching? And after mapping out all the possible like market segments that they could go after with this more sharpened thing around dispatching, it became really clear that bulk commodity haulers they're a smaller part of the market, but they're the ones who truly have dispatching challenges. These are the folks that are moving like all the specialty, like between oils and like milk and all the commodity products, but they usually require specialty trucking pieces, a lot of repeat routes, but the logistics need to be just right because the margins are razor thin. And so when we worked through this and sharpened this with them, we ultimately got to a message that is much more specific, the TMS for bulk haulers, and you can clearly see their differentiation. We're like, look, we've built this to tackle the unique challenges of your dispatching for this specific segment. And so this sort of wedge strategy for them, when we just finished, so when we talk about success and case studies, we'll see, but going back to what we promised and what this ignited for them as a team on their marketing, the whole team rallied around this new approach. Confidence levels rose of like, wow, I not only can I get behind this positioning and messaging, but they had all these ideas about marketing tactics that they can go apply in these different channels for this specific audience. And they even recognized they may eventually broaden, but they feel really, really confident that they can go win this part of the market because nobody's saying this, right? And this is where they truly can carve out their little space of the market. And these little spaces could still be a $50 million business just just doing this. And so I love this as an example, just to going back to the clarity of thought and the confidence from the founding team as they're going to go execute their marketing programs.
Absolutely. Such a good example of positioning for niching down. I love that. It reminds me of a project we just worked on with an ed tech company who was positioning as courseware for the entire higher education market. And after we worked with them, we realized that their best type of customers by far were the music instruction market. So we helped reposition all their content around just courseware for music instruction. And that had a huge impact. And when you say positioning can get the whole company behind the product more, I think that's so true. And positioning just has tentacles into so many different things, because you might be getting fewer leads, but on the back end of that, the lifetime value could be so much more. If you're reducing your churn, if you're lengthening the engagements with these people, if you're improving the relationship of your team, if you're cutting bad prospects for your sales team, if you're giving your customer support team customers that are just a much better fit, that are easier and better to work with, like I said, just tentacles into everything that the company does to really nail the
think
position.
about the power of this too. This is the other counterintuitive thing around positioning, is some folks might say, oh no, this is going to pigeonhole ourselves. We'll only be able to work with bulk haulers. The reality is, if this truly works and they execute this and they carve out their spot in the bulk hauler market, what it really emphasizes is dispatching. And here's the thing, other trucking companies that aren't bulk haulers, some still really care about dispatching. But now when they come in, and Toro is known for having incredible dispatching, there's going to be these adjacent segments that are naturally going to be drawn and going to be curious about this. We see this in our business all the time. We position specifically for B2B startups, usually horizontal B2B startups and SaaS startups. We get some B2C, we get service companies, we've worked with publicly traded companies, because we position so well and we've carved out our little space of the market that these adjacent folks are like, I know I'm not a perfect fit, but I think you can help me. And of course we could still sell them, and we do it from a position of strength, which also, if we ever wanted, we can broaden, and we may eventually broaden years to come, where we go outside of B2B and we go up, outside of even startups. But you have to do it from a place of strength. Otherwise, if you do this broad thing, especially early stage, there's no way you can own it all. There's just no way.
Definitely. I love that you mentioned that, because in what I do, people are coming to me for help with inbound organic, right? And that ties into what you're doing very much, because we often say the exact same thing, that you have to niche down. You have to really be solving a specific problem for a specific part of the market. And most times, they're reluctant to do that. They're scared. They say, oh, well, what about all of our customers that we're getting in the other segments, even though they might not be as good? And then I usually come back to them from the position of an inbound marketer. I say, okay, well, how many inbound leads are you getting organically from those segments? Well, the answer is usually, well, none or very few. And I said, okay, well, if you're, if how you're reaching this market is through outbound, through cold outbound, through referrals, don't you think you're still going to be getting those? And in addition to that, if I can help you get your best customers through inbound, you'll have that on top of it. So yeah, again, to your point, you're not pigeonholing yourself. Instead, you're just, strengthening one position that you can always build on later, right? You mentioned your frameworks. Is there any specific tools or techniques or resources that you typically point early stage SaaS marketers to that you would want to mention?
Yeah, I don't know about ultra innovative, but a couple things to try that are really maybe tangible and things you can do pretty easily. The first one, go to your homepage, and you can put this in a separate doc or wherever, but go pull out all the headers and put them into a little notes or whatever you use to just jot down these things. And then read those headers. Even better yet, have someone who doesn't know what you do read those headers and see what they say they think it is. Because this just gets into clarity around positioning, but also clarity around homepage messaging, because people aren't going to read the whole site. They're going to skim the thing. And so that's a wonderful heuristic just to see how sharp you're being, how buzzwordy you are, how broad you are. relative to where you're at as a company size. And it'll probably give you some insights of, wow, okay, we aren't being as clear as we could be. Another small exercise that's super useful, and I'll give credit to Rob. Rob Snyder is a guy, he runs a product market fit camp where he takes founders through a process of like trying to find fit and getting first 100 customers, that sort of thing. And he has a view on this that we share and totally agree with, that product market fit is when you can swap out the logos on your case studies. And so run that smoke test on yourself and basically read the case study and how much consistency do you actually have in your case studies? If you don't have that, it's a signal of a couple things. One, you may not have fit as you know it, or in the reality, you may have multiple levels of fit, but that should influence how you're thinking about your positioning, how you're thinking about your marketing. Because ultimately, marketing is recreating the success of a case study. It's reverse engineering it. Where were they before they even knew about us? What did they see, or what did we do to get them to even see us? What did we say or do to get them to try? What did we say or do to get them to activate? It's a wonderful conduit to go back. The mistake, again, it goes back into the sales conversation mistake that we see, is often folks will just focus on what did we say to win the deal. And it's like, not good enough. Like, really go back. That's why we say voice of prospect is better than voice of customer as it relates to your marketing. And so those are probably the two things. If you really wanted to get advanced, I would say go through your whole customer list, and even using Fletch's model around use cases, and be brutally honest of what they bought you to do. Not what they're doing today, not what they expanded into. What did they buy you to do? What did they think they were buying? And this is where I would use our use case and category framework and just see how much variability is in there, and be ruthless and show it to your teams and use it as a way to educate of like, this is our challenge. And we saw the one that I shared in my demo. Usually there are multiple reasons. It usually means that there's multiple sets of positioning, multiple sets of marketing that need to happen. And so those are the things. They're relatively basic and foundational, but you'd be amazed how many companies don't do that and aren't even able to tell you all the different reasons why people come to them.
Great recommendations. And the things that are specific and basic, in my opinion, are absolutely the most helpful things for for the most marketers. You know, it's I would call it advanced basics, right? I want to pick on one thing you mentioned because I think it's so interesting, is the voice of the prospect instead of the voice of the customer. Because if you're talking to your best customers, it's a little different than the people you want to be speaking to on your website, on your homepage. So do you typically find that it's better to get that information directly from the sales team? Do you have clients who are running surveys or doing studies in that regard? I think it seems like the easiest way to get that information is just talking to the salespeople, but I could be wrong.
It's I'll give you an even better one. Go talk to the prospects. And this is another thing too, and it maybe even folds into like a closing CTA for me, is like, if you're doing marketing in a company, whether you're a founder, I don't care what your role is, but if you're working on positioning and messaging and marketing, all this stuff, you have to be willing to do all of the work. And so part of that is getting into early conversations with customers. Another way of saying that is like, the best product marketers and early stage marketers I know at these startups aren't afraid to get and run a sales call to see what it's like. Sure, you can go talk to the salespeople. That's helpful. I'll also say is like, this data is just out there. I mean, Gong and all these conversational intelligence tools. Go listen to every first sales call. You'd be amazed at what you hear. And people they overlook this stuff. And it ties back into is like, oh yeah, we want to talk about our most successful customers, but they're just so far ahead. Because like the best customers, they see your vision, they figured it out. And like what we forget is that just all the decisions and all the change management and all the steps they had to take to get there. And so like when we were developing Fletch and figuring things out, and we get this question a lot, should we run a survey? And like, yeah, there's tests you can run. You can run a winter test on your messaging, but like, it's not going to tell you what they're really thinking. Most feedback on your positioning and marketing should happen in a conversation like this, where we can see each other. I can see the reactions in your eyes. It's very qualitative. And so when we were building Fletch, Anthony and I had, hundreds of calls with founders as we were building this thing. And we were testing different stuff. And it's painful. They're hard conversations. You won't have all the answers. You're going to ask dumb questions. You're going to try a bunch of stuff. And we literally filtered through hundreds of conversations as we were sharpening our own positioning qualitatively. And then this comes back to just having that product sense in a way of making a bet and where you're going to position. And so nothing beats qualitative feedback. That's probably like the big thing there. listen to the gong calls, get in the room with them, interact with them where they're at before they become a customer. And people look at social media tools like LinkedIn as if they're like promotional. The way we look at them is that's our market. And so I get to have I literally have hundreds of conversations going simultaneously with prospects and peers about who we serve in comments, in my posts, in DMs, and then eventually in calls. Don't stop doing that work. And it still today makes up probably 10 to 20 hours of my week because it's my pulse on the market so that I know what to say across our marketing and across our sales funnel.
Amazing. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So wrapping things up, talk about niching down, talk about the 80-20 principle. What's the one thing you want to leave us with today regarding positioning? Be
willing to have an opinion. It astounds me how, and I think this comes back to human nature a little bit, where we want to sound so professional and look so good that we are afraid of somebody challenging what we say or what we believe in. And where it shows up in our work is sometimes we'll get in the room with these teams that have incredible point of views on what the future could look like in their market with these tools. And we're just like, when we hear it, we're like, that's fucking amazing. Pardon my French. It's just like, that is, it's so cool to hear because you just can buy into it. And then we say, hey, you should say that in your marketing. Like we should position you that way. And they just are like, no, I can't. I don't want to upset the incumbents. I don't want to upset some people in my department role area. And when we hear that, it's like, okay, you might not upset them, but it's also not going to work, right? These markets are more crowded than ever. And so you have to say something different. Like literally foundationally, you can't show up and everybody is following best practices and doing everything right. Like pick an enemy, have an opinion. You're allowed to change your opinion, put yourself out there. That is effectively good positioning and good marketing in general. No one's willing to do it. Everyone wants all of the market. They're not willing to appease one small group and piss off another group. And that to me is like the signal that it doesn't matter, you can work with us all you want. If you're not willing to make some of those hard decisions and put yourself out there, maybe starting a company that you think is going to grow and carve out a space isn't the thing for you. And so that would be my challenge to the folks listening is like, lean into your strong point of views. People with strong point of views build the best products and they build the best, those are the ones that actually stand out in markets.
Wow, that's good stuff. I love that. It reminds me actually of one of the 48 laws of power, one of Robert Greene's laws of power. I think it says that if you haven't made any enemies, then you should probably think about going and making some enemies because you're doing something wrong, right? So yeah. I think so much of the mistakes that marketers make, especially early on, is related to fear, right? They're afraid to have a strong, unique position. They're afraid to offend some of their market. They're afraid to offend someone internally, or they're afraid to give away too much information about the product, about the business. Getting through all of these fears is such a big part of content marketing, and I know it's such a big part of positioning and basically everything you do as a marketer. So I love that you said that. That's all the questions I have for you today, Rob. Thank you so much for coming on and doing the show. Just to close things out, where can people find more information about Fletch and kind of what's the next step that you recommend?
Yeah, 2 ways to get in touch with us. Go right to our website, fletchbmm.com. Book some time with us if you're having positioning issues. But really, for everybody else, like LinkedIn is the way. We're very active on there. We have not automated anything yet. That could change, but we still, when you talk to us, send us a DM, connect, talk in the comments of the post. We're posting pretty much every day. That's the best way to ask questions, and we're going to engage. Like, we're going to be open. We're going to be honest. We're going to share our point of view, and just jump in there and join the conversation.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Rob.
Thanks for having me. This was a blast.